my name's Dan Schultz, and I'm basically here to talk about some of the lessons I've gleaned about innovation and mobile experiences in my time so far as a functioning adult. So before I dive in, you got a little bit of my background, but I'll explain where I'm coming from. I'm a creative technologist, and I got involved in civic media pretty early in my career thanks to the Knight News Challenge. I spent 2 years at the MIT Media Lab, a year at the Boston Globe as a Knight-Mozilla Fellow. And today I wear a couple hats. One important one is I'm an RJI Fellow, but most of my time is spent as a partner in a lean startup firm called the Silicon Valley Software Group. So I know the whole point of this conference is mobile, but since this is a presentation about building innovative products, I'm going to start off a little more generally, talking about the process of validating new ideas through proofs of concept or minimum viable products. So who here has heard of an MVP before, or is familiar with the purpose of it? Okay, so for those who aren't as familiar, I'm going to solidify what I mean by MVP with a couple of examples that I've worked on. So this first one is a project called Newsjack. These are going to be, I'm going to blow right through them. So it's called Newsjack. It makes it really easy for people to remix the front pages of news sites just by clicking and changing a headline and then publishing their result. Sounds fun, right? This is Truth Goggles, which you'd heard about a little bit. It tries to help readers think more carefully by highlighting phrases that have been fact-checked, guiding the user through the process of critical analysis. Opened Captions was made while I was at the Boston Globe, and we were trying to think of interesting ways to cover the presidential debates on a second screen. And it's a live stream of words being spoken on C-SPAN. So you could go to opencaptions.com right now and see words streaming across your device, which are what people are saying this very instance. This is CivOmega, which is basically a Mad Libs for government data sets. It lets people ask questions and then tries to find answers using civic APIs that are out there. And this is the OnOnion, which uses the curation powers of Reddit to create a version of the Onion filled with headlines that look like they should be satirical, but are actually totally real. So the key behind all of these projects is that each one was coded in less than 2 weeks of person hours. In most cases, 1 week of person hours. And each of them explores a very specific idea. And each of them was released to the public for people to use, and it generated a lot of feedback, in some cases a lot of buzz as well. So for minimal effort, we got out a whole, like 5 different products that each explored a different direction, an innovative direction that hadn't existed before. So if individuals can afford to do this stuff, a legacy media organization should be able to also, but a lot of them don't. And the reason for this is pretty simple. It's hard to fit random hacks into an organizational strategy. And it's a bad idea to spend limited resources without having a strategy behind it. So one answer to this challenge is to only pursue new products after spending a lot of time gathering requirements, researching markets, and securing a budget for 6 months of development. But this approach really reduces the amount of risk you can take, and as a result, it curbs the level of innovation that you can pursue. So this is where the lean startup approach can be really helpful, even if you're not a startup. Lean startup is a process that focuses on answering questions to help you validate and adjust your visions before wasting too much time on them. So this cycle starts with an idea, which you then build on to create a product in around 4 weeks. That product is going to be used by people. You measure how they use it and collect data. You take that data and you use that to learn about which of your assumptions about what people value were correct and which of your assumptions were incorrect. And it may be that you were totally off base with your original idea. Your idea really stinks, but that's the point of this process. You didn't spend 6 months building an MVP. You spent 1 month building an MVP. And then you can take the data and the lessons learned to feed back into this cycle, come up with the next iteration, or maybe a completely different idea that benefits from what you learned. And you haven't burned through your entire innovation budget. So the first step before you even dive into that cycle is to identify the problem that you actually want to solve. And this is where you, as not necessarily a technologist, come in, and you know about your market, you know your own personal experiences and what your pain points are, and you have an understanding of where the opportunities might be. The next step is you propose a solution. what do you think is the best way to solve that problem? And then this, combined with your problem, makes up your idea. So buried in your problem and solution are a whole slew of these assumptions about what people value. These are the things that need to be validated. These are the unknowns. And they're going to dictate that feature set, that small feature set that you build out in the course of a month. So instead of, adding social sharing and adding this crazy feature that you think sounds really cool, but doesn't actually have anything to do with the original problem solution statement, these assumptions are sort of, you make sure every feature on your list is tied to one of these things you're trying to prove. And then this yields that minimum viable product. Okay, sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page in terms of what the scope of innovation here is when I'm talking about a mobile innovation strategy. And that when we're talking about, upgrading a content management service to support mobile, or we're talking about creating a new product for mobile, you don't need to see this as a giant elephant that needs a lot of validation before you start building. You can actually build to achieve that validation. So is that clear before I go into anything related to mobile specifically? And this is something that I think that startups do all the time in San Francisco, but it's also something that I think legacy organizations can and should be able to do, especially legacy media organizations. Okay, so armed with this higher level approach, let's talk about mobile. So there are three things that make mobile different from, say, using a laptop or listening to the radio. The first are the inputs and the outputs, which are the tools available to you as a problem solver. The second is context, which is what will help you think about the different opportunities available to you. And the third is experience, which are what are the user expectations when they're going to be using your application that you need to consider if you want to design a good solution. So even if you have a great idea and it solves a great problem and it meets a great need, if you're not meeting users where they're expecting the experience to be, it's probably going to end up being a failure. So that would be a bad way to fail. So for inputs and outputs, a mobile device is a networked ball of sensors. And each sensor enables a new approach to an old problem. And so remember that sensors provide data, but you can extrapolate other information from that data. So for instance, GPS provides location, but by tracking over time, you can figure out distance and direction. Or you could look up weather using a weather API. So being familiar with these basic capabilities of your device is really important if you're planning to rely on it in a product. So the other thing is, since all of these devices are networked, you actually have to be really familiar with the capabilities of the internet in general, of course. But that's what makes these are things that you're going to be taking into account when you're designing a solution. The other thing, context. This is about when, why, and how people might be using a mobile application. So for instance, when driving, I'm not going to be able to pay full attention to my phone. My attention is going to be very limited, but I might need to use it to get directions. When I'm on a bus, however, I might have 15 minutes to kill, where I can be just totally focused on whatever activity it is I choose to do at that time. When I'm hungry, I need a place to find a place to eat. And when I'm exercising, I might want to use my phone to keep track of what I've done so far. So as you're thinking about these problems and opportunities for creative solutions, you want to be thinking in these terms. How much time and attention will people have when using your solution? What will they be doing? And what need is going to trigger their use? So why are they going to think to use your application? Experience, the mobile experience is pretty unique, right? It's not at all like using a laptop. It's not at all like watching TV. It's more interruptible. So I might start using an application and then 5 seconds later realize I need to go do something for 5 minutes, and then I might want to come back and do the same thing. It's going to be very task-oriented. I pick up my phone to do something. I usually have that something in mind. Maybe it's wasting time, but maybe it's looking up a restaurant review. It needs to be a simple user interface because you don't have as much real estate on your screen. There just aren't as many pixels to work with, not as much information that you can convey in the same amount of time. It's got to be quick. People aren't going to sit around for 5 minutes waiting for a video to load. You need your UX to be snappy. Like I said, it's smaller, so the scope of the kinds of things you can do can't necessarily be as advanced as they would be on a device that has more widgets and gadgets going on for it. And it's ubiquitous. People carry their phones around all the time. So if you so all of these things put together, the UI, the inputs and outputs, the contexts and the experience really make up a mobile application. So if you pick a mobile app, you can explore it in these terms. One of I was trying to think of sort of what is the archetypal, like what application is out there that really hits almost every single thing on the list, and Google Now is a pretty good one. Has anyone here seen or used Google Now before? Who hasn't? Okay, so a couple people haven't. Basically, this is a thing on an Android device. It's keeping track of where you are. It's predicting information you're going to need, so it knows like when your flight's coming in, and it says you should probably head out the door if you want to catch your flight. Kind of creepy in a way, but the point is it really hits on, it's using everything it can in terms of the sensors. It's using everything it can in terms of knowing about you based on your information footprint on the web. And it's designed in a way so that the user experience can sort of fit into the way that you actively go about doing things. So I'm not going to do too much exploration of this application, but definitely I challenge you to sort of take this way of thinking about mobile applications and mobile innovation and apply it to pick an app here and think about the decisions that they were making. Okay, so with the time I have left, I actually want to go through a really quick example of a mobile MVP and what kind of thought process you could put into it. And then after that, any Q&A. So, all right, we're a room full of media organizations for the most part. And so one problem that a lot of us might want to solve is that people are disconnected from their geographic communities, and we think that's because information they consume is unrelated to their physical locations, right? As a solution, we want to create personal content feeds based on exact places where your users spend their time. So before we even go any further, you can think about how mobile is really shaping this problem statement and this solution statement. We're able to think about the only reason we're able to think about personal content feeds based on exact places where users spend their time is because mobile is so ubiquitous and because mobile has location sensors so we can keep track of where people are going. The focus on geography is not necessarily because of mobile, but it's definitely something that we can come up with different types of solutions around because of what tools are available to everybody. So buried in those problems and solutions are a bunch of assumptions. And so before we go out and build a grand cathedral, let's identify those assumptions, and then we're going to design a minimum viable product around that could be built really quickly using a mobile phone. So we're assuming that readers are going to spend time reading news related to places they've been, and right? That's not necessarily a safe assumption. They might not have the time to spend. They might not feel like spending it. We're assuming that readers are going to be comfortable, and I say readers, but this could apply to broadcast as well, of course, right? Users, right? But we're assuming that they're going to run an application that tracks their position, which is a potentially invasive thing. And we're assuming that that this solution will actually solve the original problem, right? Which is that people care more about their community if they know what's happening in it. None of these things are necessarily true. We have experience that makes us think they're probably true, and that's why we're going in the direction that we have it, but these are hypotheses. We also have hypotheses about media organizations. So we're assuming that their media organizations are going to publish content in a way that can actually be tied to the locations. And we're also assuming that there's going to be enough content to power these personalized feeds. So does this make sense? So this actually is enough to sort of define the shape of a mobile solution, right? A mobile application that you could build. It's not necessarily tied to what you have in your organization already, but it's a new product offering, right? It's a new way of getting people to consume your content. It's potential, if it does meet a need, it could get very popular very fast. And you don't need to be a person hacking in a garage to sort of define something in this way. So this is an example of an MVP that tests those core assumptions, right? Very simple, very basic. You've got a map, right? It allows people to see where the content they're reading is associated with. You've got the content itself, which is the news, right? You've got a way of engaging, which you can then track to see if people are actually going in and reading more. And then you have a way of navigating through these stories. this is it, right? These 4 features, this screen essentially, plus the read more screen, will test all of these assumptions. With pretty minimal effort, you would be able to find out if readers will spend any time using this application, right? It does what you want it to do. It tracks their position. It collects a content feed. You could even have this used by 5 people, and you just have somebody sitting in a room responsible for personally putting together their content feeds. You don't need to come up with some crazy algorithm to solve this problem. And at the end of the day, you'll know if people like to use it. And that will inform whether or not you should continue to pursue it. So this is actually, these are the points I wanted to make. So I just wanted to convey this concept of you don't need to think of mobile innovation as a behemoth. You don't need to think of it as a $1 million endeavor. You can think of it as something that really just uses up a couple weeks of company developer time, or just brainstorming on a weekend, or going to a hackathon and churning out a proof of concept. And as long as this is fitting into as long as you can tie in the organizational strategy of what markets are you trying to pursue, what problems have you as an organization been identifying, and then, this is the kicker, the advantage that you have as a legacy media organization is you have a huge audience available to test this stuff. So that is a major advantage. You can generate traction in an instant as long as you're approaching this in a way that has faith in the process and faith in your ability to fail constructively. So that's it in terms of what I wanted to talk about. But if there are any questions, please give me a shout.
So, to the issue of which content to which platform at which time in the progression of the storytelling process, is there a way to, if I built for a .com and realizing that people probably are using these 2 devices differently, is there a way to easily transcend the issue of, I'm primarily text-based? Because I talked to a news organization last summer, and they said, and they were in television, and they said 97% of what is consumed is text on our mobile devices. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Why? Is it because you're not optimizing content to those devices, or is it because, do you not have it designed correctly, or is it simply because people choose to have that experience? So your
thoughts.
That's a
great example of questions that can get answered through something like this, right, through an MVP, right? So you aren't sure if people aren't reading it because it's a poor design. You aren't sure if people aren't reading because they don't want to. And you can answer that without building a full-blown product saturated with link bait and whatever features that you think you need as an organization to drive traffic. If the goal is to answer a question, you can design a product that is specifically geared to getting you that answer. And then you just need to make sure you're asking the right questions, that you actually are approaching this problem with the hypothesis that you believe in. So, yeah.
And a question maybe for some legacy media companies, and maybe I can turn the tables back here as I flip my microphone off. Do you feel like your infrastructure, and maybe Michael, I'm going to put you on the spot, okay? Do you feel like your infrastructure optimizes content to mobile first? And I don't know where Barb is, but Ernie, maybe you can queue up as well in terms, Joe as well, in terms of optimizing content as a legacy media player.
Yeah, well, I mean, you nailed it, Jim, when you say it. In a lot of ways, what we do is we build based on the metrics. So we look at what are the users consuming, how are they consuming it, how much time are they spending with it, where are the referrals coming from, what are the types of content, not just formats, but also editorial formats. For us to be able to optimize. But when it comes right down to it, a newsroom publishing system doesn't have the level of metadata that you would need to be able to do some of the more complex things that we're talking about. And I think that's the biggest struggle. In a lot of ways, a typical newsroom system has a story slug and a script, and that's it. There's no data really attached to it. Now, thankfully, there are a lot of organizations working hard to make it better. But if you don't have that information going into it, it's really hard to be able to develop a front end for the user that's a lot more rich.
And I'll just add to that, I think, as a legacy company like ours, we definitely are not exactly publishing just for mobile right now. And I think, it's one of the things where it's a shift. It's a mindset shift first, but then you have to build the infrastructure to go along with that. So we've got the mindset that we need to build for mobile first, but now the infrastructure needs to follow. So I think that's kind of where we're at right now, where we're getting to the point where it is mobile first. And in our minds, it's mobile first, but our infrastructure is not exactly set up for that just yet.
And just to jump on that real quickly, when he talks about these kinds of solutions, does that make you breathe a sigh of relief a little bit, or are there other variables that enter into the decision making to get over that? Because it seems to me that that's where a lot of legacy media companies are in terms of optimizing content to mobile.
Am I on here? Yeah. Yeah, I guess it does put me at ease a little bit, but it's really more of it's almost like turning a ship, and you can't do it on a dime, unfortunately. You need to take time to do it right. And now that we have become a mobile-first company, that's part of moving that ship, turning it in the right direction. So I think that's where we're at.
And one of the things, turning on a dime concept, right? The metaphor is pretty much exactly what you just said. All right, I have a destination, and I think this is the direction I want to go. And one approach is put all your company resources behind it. You've picked a direction, you've researched the direction, and that's the direction you're going. And then you find out you're wrong, because you probably are. And then you have to veer to the right and go back to where you were trying to go, but that's very costly, and you've spent probably months of development cycles and who knows how many tens of thousands of dollars going in this direction that is slightly off. And so if you can shrink that down and you have your theories and you can just approach it without needing to build it into your CMS before you're answering the basic questions. The product you build in these MVPs is not the product you're necessarily going to release. It's a product that's really about just informing the decisions that you do make when you do go in the full direction.
And I should say that we've heard from Michael Gay from Journal Broadcasting and from Ernie Morello from Hearst Broadcasting. And Joe Rooney, I want to put you on the line and on this as well, because you do a lot of traveling to all the Raycom stations. In terms of infrastructure, where do you feel you are?
Quite a ways behind, I would say. I would say that we're quite a ways behind. The CMS that we utilize is based on a 25-year-old code base, okay? And it's one of those that just does not allow for the flexibility to be able to display things in the proper format that will gain the traction on those various platforms. There's that infrastructure needs to change, and we're working on doing that, but that's at the most basic level of trying to get that really into the 1990s, in terms of just the capability of the sites as a whole. But then when you go into the redesign aspect of it, we're looking at just how we can adjust and kind of morph that content ourselves outside of the CMS capabilities just to make it work for what we want it to. But again, that's a process of just being able to go through and you're creating a customized application essentially on your own at that point.
Right. And I guess if the goal here is, I think I'm going to jump back to the very first, if the title of this segment, right? If the goal here really is mobile innovation, right? Then you can't be tied down to the technology from the 90s. And you do need to be able to, in a strategic way, innovate and do iterations and try new things that might turn into your new I mean, who knows? Maybe this crazy idea turns into your next CMS, or it gives validation to a concept that warrants funding to support a new CMS, right? Nobody's going to say, okay, we'll help you build this because you think it's going to be great. But they might say, okay, we're willing to, we have an R&D lab and they can focus on exploring this aspect that doesn't fit into our normal operations. There's no way it's going to work with the existing CMS. But if it turns out that it's something everyone loves and it's become a huge hit and it hits BuzzFeed and blah, 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 then maybe there will be more organizational backing behind it after that fact.
And if I can put one more person on the spot, Neil, can I put you on the spot here real quickly? Neil Cass from the Weather Company. I mean, you've made some huge changes in terms of content and distribution over the last 12 to 18 months. Have you made the same kinds of changes in infrastructure that we haven't seen?
So I feel like we're cheating a little bit into my presentation.
Okay, don't do too much of that. Yeah.
So I'll give you the tease, which is I think we're way out ahead on some things and probably behind on others. You know, when I think about mobile first and real-time news, to me that's really Instagram and Vine, in the sense that you create it and publish it within minutes, and it's available to everyone else. I think few news organizations are capable of that, other than through these outside tools, really. When we produce video digitally, typically we'll have a 2-hour turnaround on a piece. If it's a rush and breaking, we can get it 30 to 45 minutes, which is creating it and then getting it through our sort of cantankerous publishing technology, which takes a while. These sort of ancient gears are grinding while video is being processed. But Vine does that like a magic trick. Like you hit it, and like 2 seconds later, your friend's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that just happened." So, that's the technological leap we're looking at now to figure out how we do that kind of publishing as well.
And you could, the technology behind Vine could be hacked together in 2 weeks.
Agree, because we've looked at the code base.
Right. Yes. I mean,
yes.
And that's the key that I really want to. That's the whole point of all this, is that the infrastructure needed for mobile innovation is non-existent. Really, it's all about the strategy, and so it's all about the coming up with the right approach. So, thank you very much, everybody. Please feel free to get in touch with me. Talk to you.